youth from NGO. Still on this paper, we're going to see socio-cultural activities. We can read the full story on page 4 of this paper. Now on to other news. Still on, we see the Kamaset holds Vice's Constitution Awards members for excellence. Still on this paper, we're going to look at the recognition for services. Former Treasury DAG Mbo Patrice Lumumba, he was decorated with Medal of Commander. Now we're moving on to the next newspaper. We're moving on to, putting down the Reporter newspaper. We're going to the Guardian Post. And on the Guardian Post, the headline says, GMs join ministers on hot seats as Biya announces appointments. You can read more of this story on page 6 of stories. Another postponement could have been avoided. More of these on page 4 of the same newspaper. Still on the Guardian Post, they are also drawing attention to the 4th European Film Festival. EU restates ambition to reinforce cultural ties with Cameroon. Finally, on this paper, we are moving on to basic education, with 1,000 classrooms in 7 regions. Now we're done with the Guardian Post, and we're moving on to the Median newspaper. In the Median newspaper, let's see what they've decided to lead with this morning. Now, the first headline says, Transatlantic DSA defies PM's order, continues scanning operations at Douala Port. The newspaper also poses the question, if the FACO SDO ate soya to protect absentee TICO assistant mayor in relation to cancelled council session. Now, on a more serious note, tucked in the corner of the front page, is a report on the message to the nation. Biya postpones the new government local elections. Now we are moving on to the next newspaper, which is the Cameroon Insider. Its main focus is the February 11th message by Paul Biya. It says, February 11th message, Paul Biya assures youth of more leadership roles. You can read the full story on page 2 and 3 of this newspaper. Now, with its focus still on February 11th, it says February 11th, march past across the nation, shows of youthful maturity. You can read the full stories on page 8 and 9. And on to social issues, this paper reports on an accident where 11 died in a day at Kribi in 72 hours. You can read this story on page 10 of the newspaper. Now we are moving on to the next newspaper. Let's look at the Herald Tribune, where government hails Rainbow Higher Institute of Applied Microfinance Management. You can read this story on page 3 of the newspaper. Still on this paper, we look at the story where Pope Leo is to visit Cameroon during Easter. Moving from the religious areas to youth affairs, Biya calls for self-employment amid biting youth unemployment. You can read this interesting story on page 3 of the newspaper. Now we're going to move on to the Voice newspaper. In the Voice newspaper, Biya thanks the youth for 2025 victory, and he vows youth quake in power. We can read the full story on page 6. Still on this paper, Honorable Malumba recognized for exceptional youth leadership. We can read the full story on page 5 of the paper. Now we're moving on to the municipal update. In the municipal update, it actually touches on the President's Youth Day address, just like the other newspapers have. And here we see Biya recommit to empower, promote youth development. We can read the full story on page 3 of this newspaper. Now on to social affairs. SMEs Ministry, UN Unite to enhance youth, women entrepreneurship. We can read the full story on page 2 of the newspaper. Now we are moving to the horizon. We are moving to the horizon where Agbo Bala corrects Bia in his Youth Day address. Now this newspaper also looks at the Prometheus Group, how the Prometheus Group unveils an ambitious industrial vision for Cameroon. Still on the horizon, Archbishop Jean Baga consecrates St. Charles Borromeo Parish, Simeon. We can read the full story on page 5. Now we are leaving the horizon and we're going very quickly to the Advocate newspaper. While other papers are focused on the Youth Day, the Advocate has chosen to complete a completely different path today, leading with Esther Omam gets light of woman traditional title. We can read the full story on her. Now, the Advocate also talks on government. UNICEF wants birth certificate for every school kid in Cameroon. We can read this story on page 2 of the newspaper. Now we're going to go to our next newspaper for the day. We digress to Cameroon Echoes. What does Cameroon Echoes have for us today? As it stopped stories being from where the staff representative, the elections in Dian, where Nawo Fowl list triumph with 100%. Now we can read the full story on page 5 of this newspaper. Now the paper also takes us to Bafaka Balue, where the community gives scholarships to over 120 outstanding students. We can read the full story on page 4 of Cameroon Echoes newspaper. And finally, last but definitely not the least, we are moving on to The Sun. In The Sun newspaper, University of Boya Council adopts 11.79 billion 2026 budget. And we can read this story on page 6 of our newspaper. Finally, on this newspaper, we see that the PM